You're going to hear now a very nice, delightful, short piece by Franz Schubert, and it's a quite well-known piece among his piano pieces. This is the Impromptu in A flat, Opus 90, number 4. Franz Schubert, Austrian composer, fully of the city of Vienna, which was then in the late 18th and early 19th century truly a city of musicians. Mozart, Haydn, and Beethoven all centered themselves there, and they all worked there and they composed there. What made Schubert a little bit different is that, unlike them, they all came from somewhere else. But Schubert was actually born there, and he was of the city of Vienna. He had a very short lifespan, only 31 years, 1797 to 1828. And yet, in that very short lifespan, he gave us somewhere to around 1,500 compositions, of which 600 plus are in the area of Lieder, German art song. He was the first great composer of that kind of composition. But there are other works, there are symphonies, wonderful chamber music, piano works. So he had that same gift that Mozart did, to write spontaneously, and that was why he was able to produce so many things. Mozart, too, who only lived 35 years, gave us 620 plus compositions. But here, with Schubert, gave us twice as much. He worked in Vienna at the same time as Beethoven, but they were completely different composers. Beethoven, as you already know from before, was the most disturbing force to hit music, very rugged composer, charting new paths. Schubert was a relatively gentle composer, very lyrical. And that's what makes him, as he's considered to be one of the earliest of the Romantic era composers. There's no record, that, as far as I know or have read, that Beethoven and Schubert ever really even interacted in any way, musically or whatever. They just were in kind of separate spheres in the city of Vienna, although it is known that Schubert was a pallbearer at Beethoven's funeral in 1827. But they were in separate worlds, and Schubert was a kind of a dreamer, in his life. He once said, "I feel I don't really belong to this world at all." That was kind of a whole different approach. So Schubert's approach to music was very, like I say, lyrical. With pure music, was not showy. Yes, of course there are lots of, technical difficulties in his music. Of course there are. But it wasn't in a showy way. And one big manifestation of his not being a showy composer was that, unlike most composers of that time, he didn't write any concerto. There's no piano concerto by Schubert. There's no violin concerto, cello concerto, because a concerto usually would emphasize something showy on the part of the soloist. There is none of that. It's all pure music. It's very lyrical. So, as I say, in comparison to Beethoven, kind of a gentler composer. And he's one of the earliest of the Romantic era composers as such. There are lengthy works by him. There are short works by him, as I said earlier. More marvelous chamber music, 2 marvelous piano trios, for instance, string quartets, several symphonies. The very well-known one is the so-called Unfinished Symphony, because it only has 2 movements instead of the usual 3 or 4. And in the piano music, there are a good many short works and also some very lengthy pieces, which sometimes have been referred to as being of, quote, heavenly length. They're very expansive, half hour or more in performance. One such is a very fine example. It's his last piano sonata, the Sonata in B flat, Opus Posthumous, which is one of the greatest works, I think, in the entire piano literature. It's all pure music, really. It's in 4 movements, and if you hear a performance of that, boy, you got to be really attuned to hearing something really, really intense and musical. I played it long ago. I think it was about 1980, I think, was when I played it last. And I've been thinking off and on, maybe I should bring it back. With that kind of piece, if I played that kind of piece, I wouldn't play an encore after that, because I would think, to play an encore, this Hungarian Rhapsody or something showy would be almost like a desecration after you play something like that. You just have to leave the audience really with their thoughts and their emotions, and just, that's it, you just don't do it with something like that. I will bring back that song. I've been thinking off and on about doing that. Here's the thing, I plan sometimes to bring something back, and then stupid concert comes up, and it gets in the way, and then I have to kind of concentrate on whatever I'm going to do for that concert, and that kind of gets postponed. But it'll get done. And when I do get it back, whenever that be, it will get on this channel. I will one day do that. But like I say, when you're playing a short work, this impromptu in A flat, he wrote, say, a fair number of short piano pieces, and among them are 8 which are called impromptu. There are 4 in Opus 90, and there are 4 in Opus 142. And even that word impromptu suggests something spontaneous, and just like off the cuff. And as I said earlier, he had this very easy way of writing, so you could just kind of toss it off. And that's what this impromptu is like, just the first part of it just has these little passages that kind of roll along, almost effortlessly. The middle section is more restrained, and lyrical before that first part comes back. Another thing which comes to mind, is that, sometimes there are people who have names that are very similar to what they do. It's purely coincidental. But I've noticed this on a number of occasions, like in various fields. For instance, I remember, years ago, one of those resorts in the Catskill Mountains, they were very popular, several decades ago. And I remember seeing an advertisement, maybe it was in the New York Times or somewhere, about the family that owned one of these places. And the family name was Dinnerstein. So here they have a restaurant, and yet the word dinner is part of their name. Or you think of, there was a judge somewhere, Judge Justice. That was his last name, Judge Justice. Then you have the famous woman tennis player, Margaret Court, tennis court. Gary Player, the golfer, playing sports. That pop personality, Alicia Keys. I think she plays piano, so the piano keys. And then recently we had in the news this person who was just sent to jail now for some defrauding lots of investors, and part of his last name is Bankman, so the word bank, and yet he's in finance. So now why I mention this is because when I was at Juilliard, and I was in Juilliard from 1960 to 65. I mean, I was prep division for 2 years before that, but that was my full-time time. Here you are, the world's foremost music school. The president of Juilliard was a man named William Schumann, with one N, unlike, the famous composer Robert Schumann had 2 N's, but you had William Schumann as the president, and the dean was Mark Schubert with an A. So you had a Schumann and a Schubert as the chief executives of the world's foremost music school. I mean, so later when I went to Indiana University and was on the piano faculty for 4 years, 66 to 70, and even then it was I think it still is now, was the world's largest music school in terms of enrollment. I remember we had about 1,500 music students, that were there even then. The head of the piano department was a man named Fred Baldwin. Baldwin pianos. The Baldwin pianos used to be rivals of Steinway, So, I mean, it's all coincidence, but I've noticed this, that sometimes these things, come up and one really notices. Anyways, I think I've rambled on here enough. I mean, been in this racket long enough, maybe I should have been a shoe salesman from day one, but never mind, so anyways, I want to get on to this and play this impromptu for you, because I want to get to my late afternoon bourbon after that. So here we go. Impromptu in A flat, Opus 90, number 4 by Franz Schubert.